So, just to kick things off, as I was saying before, and I'm a really big fan of your work, and I've seen you say it in many places before about, and how you often speak about how trading is about you trade yourself, trading the market. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that? Because that's a very interesting concept.
Yes, ultimately what happens is that we see through a filter, and the filter that we see through, perceive through, is through our beliefs about what's out there, or what we would perceive as what the market is telling us. And ultimately, what you're really doing is your brain is taking sensorial data from the different senses, organizing it into a virtual representation based on the observer that you are, based on the beliefs that you are, and projecting that onto the markets. That's what you perceive. Okay, and so ultimately what you're seeing is however accurate your virtual representation, rooted in your beliefs about your ability to manage uncertainty, it's being reflected in your trading account. If you're seeing that equity curve grow up, what happens is you're showing that the virtual representation, the beliefs that you bring to the act of trading, the performance beliefs, are in fact being able to extract capital from the market. However, if you're stagnant or if you're losing money, what you're doing is your trading account is a truth meter, and it's telling you in no uncertain terms that the beliefs that you're bringing with you to manage uncertainty are not effective. So you can use a trading account as, to me, it's the only friend that you really have. It can be brutal, but it's telling you the quality of the beliefs that you're bringing and acting from. That's what it's doing.
And so why is it that trading exposes, these uncertainties, these fears, these beliefs? Why is it that it exposes it in such a powerful manner? How come is it that people cannot just be like automatons or robots and just, trade in that kind of, non-rational fashion, I would say?
Well, it's because it's impossible. We are emotional beings attempting to act from a rational emotional state. We are not rational beings trying to eliminate emotions. There is no such thing as freedom from emotion. There is freedom of emotion when you begin to use the emotions. And once you understand that emotions are biological, you are literally the embodiment of emotion, and you begin to go, well, if all thinking is emotional state dependent, then it behooves me to begin to develop the emotional side of my performance mind so that I can use knowledge, all that left brain stuff, and I can use it in an emotional cocktail that produces a disciplined impartiality in the application of my knowledge. Otherwise, you're going to continually blow up. It's and there's more to that, Houston. Okay, but ultimately, you are an emotional being. It's the only time that you do not experience emotion is when you're dead. And even impartiality, rational logic, that is an emotional state. And it's a highly coveted emotional state for the management of uncertainty, but it's an emotional state. And it's also very vulnerable to what we would call a high cortical emotional state. It's only been around probably for 100,000 years.
Right.
And it is easily hijacked by the mother of all emotions, fear. So
which is a deeper
that's
state.
why you can't do it. Yeah.
And so why is it that there is this disconnect in the industry where, it seems like for the longest time we've been taught or told that we need to, either suppress or ignore or, just try to act like Dr. Spock or, like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. Why is it that the industry's had such a disconnect for such a long time between,
Well, there's Houston, oh man, you've opened up a whole can of worms. I'll give you what I would call I'll give you what the position that is polite is that basically it is the enormous ignorance that people have about emotion and mind. Houston, a number of years ago, and I will definitely not mention any names, I was talking to a broker, and I was just starting out. I was trying to get people to interview me, and just doing all the things you do to create a business. And what I said is, what I can do is I can teach the people who are used to brokerage. I can teach them to be better traders. I can teach them to have a mind that's stable in the midst of uncertainty. And his answer to me, and I want you to hear this, is that his answer to me was, why would I want that? Okay? And he says, look, I'm going to tell you something. These people get into these trades and they churn trades. I make money off of every one of these trades. Mm-hmm. Now, he's from a time when there was an inexhaustible supply of new rookies coming onto the scene, okay, and, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and not having any sense. But he literally saw it as a way of, if I teach them how to trade better, they're going to trade less. If they trade less, then, they're not going to need as much. I'm not making as much.
So was it
and obviously there's
to continue that?
In the short term, yes, but what happens is finally you burn out your audience to keep losing money. But that's the other part is that I have found that most people just do not want to turn toward their discomfort. And some of the emotions, particularly the emotions involved with literally uncertainty, of not knowing, all that stuff like that.
Yeah. We
will do almost anything to get out of the discomfort, and yet ultimately it's turning toward that discomfort, but having a different set of skills about being able to deal with that discomfort is what you ultimately need. But most people don't want to do that. They want to say, oh, yeah. And look, Houston, you've been around the block. You've been trading 10 years. And you know as well as I do, only somewhere between 2 and 5% of the traders are actually making money doing this. Yep. Okay? And if you hear that, you're going, why in the world are we not exposing this stuff about emotional nature, and why are we not teaching our traders deep foundational skills that allow you to recognize, first of all, the mind that you brought into trading, it's just simply not going to be the one that's going to produce success in trading, unless you're just one of those lucky gene pool recipients.
One of those freaks.
Most of us, one of the freaks. Yeah, one of the freaks. Well said. Most of us really have to learn how to override our biology's self-preservation instincts. And self-preservation is game one to your biological system. And until you learn to regulate it, to calm it down so that it doesn't flare on you, it's going to always take short-term survival over long-term benefit. It's just going to do it. That's the way the system's built. And it's been basically in present configuration as a mammal for about 50 million years. So it's not like it's just going to say, oh, well, I'm going to change the paradigm I perceive reality through. And it's not going to do it. You literally have to become the designer of the mind that you bring to uncertainty, because the brain is organized to produce a sense of certainty of survival. And the mind that's needed for trading, it's not a prosperity mind, but it's a mind that engages and turns toward probability and is comfortable with probability.
And I will ask you more about training that trading mindset in a few moments. But maybe take a step back and how did you get into coaching traders? So I've heard a bit of your story in previous interviews, but I'd love to hear it again. How did you get interested in coaching traders, because we're a unique bunch?
It was a harmonic convergence is the best way to describe it. Is that I'm a clinical therapist by training, and I've gotten really bored with clinical work. It's just I'm much more into self-development and to really developing the potential that you have within you. And I had been, in Charlotte, North Carolina, we have a lot of golfers and we have a lot of bankers. And I had been focusing on self-development, performance development with that crowd. And one day, a guy walks into my office and he's having performance issues, which is nothing unusual at all. And he's a trader. And to be honest with you, Houston, I had no idea. And at the same time, I knew that he had the shtick of understanding what causes performance lapses, whether or not it's golf, whether or not it's trading, whether or not it's chess, there are these self-limiting beliefs that lying behind the emotion that you have to get at. And he was in a small hedge fund, and he was having performance issues, and you can't have performance issues when you're in a small hedge fund. And over a period of 6 months, he improved dramatically, and he started referring other people to me. And a couple of years later, my wife and I, my business partner, are looking at our book of business, and we're recognizing that we have this highly motivated group of people, these traders, that are doing the homework. They're excellent students and want more homework, and they were actually a better piece of business than the clinical clients who you basically trying to get them to do homework, trying to get them to do change. And so, we came to a moment where it was, it just made better business sense, and it also made a more philosophical difference is to start working with traders in the financial industry than it did with clinical people. And now I don't do clinical work. I'm not in the, and, I sit here in my home office, and I travel the world, anywhere from Australia to Singapore to Europe, to the United States, on a daily basis, working with people, and they are highly motivated. And there's nothing that gets me more excited as a teacher than to have a highly motivated student who wants to learn how to turn his trading account into equity growth rather than into something diluting his capital. So that's how I got into it. And
that's a great story.
Now, it's like I said, who would have thought, but
yeah.
Here,
it's hard to
I
plan
am.
for these things sometimes, the way things
serendipity.
turn out. Yeah.
Yeah, serendipity.
And it's interesting that you say that traders are a highly motivated bunch. Does it make a difference? Have you found, based upon the traders you've worked with, have you found a difference in their success based upon how they're motivated? So if they're negatively motivated, for instance, they're running away from something versus being kind of positively motivated, meaning they're running, towards a goal. Do you find that changes the dynamic of their success?
Oh, that's huge. Ultimately, what you discover in trading is that the biggest hurdle that a trader is going to have is to get outside of the mindset of controlling outcome. We have an enormous amount of biological history that is wired into our genetics to try to control outcome. And it's for short-term survival, it's for perpetuation of species, and then we grow up in families and we develop a psychology that is still trying to control outcome, self-preservation. And ultimately, what the trader has to come to understand is type A's are not going to make it in this business.
Right.
Type A's want to take action. They want to do, I've got to be doing something to be doing something. I'm highly motivated to make a lot of money. What they're not motivated to do is to change the paradigm of their thinking so that they begin to recognize that they never had control over outcome in the first place.
Right.
Never. The difference was the speed of trading is enormously faster than the speed of life. And a person can control outcome apparently by willpower, by just taking action, by doing things, by forcing his will in business and a lot of professions, or they can control outcome by perfectionism, by not making mistakes. And these two groups they can be very successful outside of trading, but they don't see, there were a lot of people who thought everything was hunky-dory in 2006. In 2008, safe investments had blown up on them, and they had lost a lot of their net worth. Me too, myself included. And ultimately, you don't see it. It's kind of like my dad smoked unfiltered cigarettes for 52 years. And everybody was telling him, Howard, this is going to kill you.
Yeah.
But he didn't see himself dying in that moment. So he was able to push it away. And by the time he really came to the moment of, at dealing with it, he was a dead man walking.
Mm.
Trading does not give you that option. You are going to find out the consequence. It's like instant karma. It's there. And what you discover is that you do not have control over outcome. That's an illusion. But what you do have control over is the process, your performance and execution. That's what you have control over. And that's a paradigm shift, because you're moving away from trying to control an external reality to where you're recognizing the only thing you can control is you.
Right. And so if you're a new trader or you're a beginning trader and you're very hyper-focused on trying to build an account up because you're trying to maybe run away from something or create a new life for yourself, or you're trading from this element of scarcity, or maybe, I guess just, kind of hyper trading, that belief system is going to catch up with you.
Oh, it will.
Yeah.
It will.
So how do you talk about that trading mindset? So how do you develop that trading mindset that kind of offsets that or puts your beliefs into harmony, so you're kind of trading in the right fashion?
Well, the first thing is you have to come to, from at least the way I teach this, Houston. I'm not saying that the way I teach it is the one and only way, but what I teach resonates and it works. Is the very first thing is you have to really come to a moment where you realize what you're doing is not successful, and you're willing to cry uncle and saying, is somebody here, can they help me? To me, that's probably one of the biggest events there is.
Yeah.
I have plenty of people call me or write me and say, I really wish I'd listened to you. I've burned through God knows how much capital, and if I'd only listened, if I'd only understood this to be true, this could have been a lot different. Well, it's too late. They have to come to the moment of where they're experiencing enough pain, okay, that forces them to recognize the mind that I'm bringing to trading is not working at the extraction of capital that allows me to live a good life. The second thing is the whole notion of really what your mind is and what your brain is in the system I use, literally the brain is a community of rival and cooperative programs that are shaping you into an organism that can survive in a particular environment. When that brain becomes mind, those programs are given voice, and suddenly what you have is you often have a shootout at the corral. You now have, instead of a community of rival programs, what you have is what I call a committee of the mind, where you have various forces that you listen to. If you don't think you have this, listen to the last time you beat yourself up, or the last time you were hesitating and you got into this argument with yourself about more confirmation. No, get in. More confirmation, get in. What you hear is these forces, these different parts of these programs that are now voices in your mind. And one of the big, huge jumps that people make is they discover that there is no such thing as I.
Right.
Descartes was wrong. Descartes was just wrong, okay? And so it's not really, I think, therefore I am. I like what the Buddhists have to say is that they say, yeah, I think, but who is this I?
Right.
And to me is that the mind is this community of rival programs, and what you're doing is you're having to develop an observer that can literally look in and say, well, who's running the committee here? Okay, who's running the committee? And what most people discover is that when they first start waking up and start looking into mind, is that their committee their mind as a committee is just absolutely disorganized, at war with itself, and you have to wake up and you have to start really training mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that the truth is that the uncertainty never changes. The challenges of uncertainty, the struggle of living never changes. However, what changes is the organization of self that you're bringing to the management of that moment in time, of that struggle. And In trading, what generally happens is that you get either a person who is fearful or anxious, and that's what's driving their decision making, or you get a person trying to prove himself and make a lot of money fast. Okay, grandiosity, type A. And both those are just out of control minds in the environment of trading. And what you're doing is you're saying, well, what does produce it? And you're going, okay, what I know, not only is there fear and grandiosity living within me, not only is there judgment, criticism, and temptation living within me, but there's also these much more highly empowered parts of the brain, and these are emotional programs. And suddenly you realize that there is discipline, there is courage, there is self-soothing, self-compassion.
Harness those in trading. Yeah.
You have to harness them. And they're there. The deal, though, is that, and it's particularly the discipline and the impartiality, these are the elements of higher order thinking that can work in probabilities. If you have a fear-based thinking, it's just simply not going to work with uncertainty and probabilities. Right. It is going to want to speak. It's even if it's hurting you, it's going to want to speak a certain answer versus the one that of the not knowing. It will choose the suffering that you're familiar with over the suffering that you might be getting yourself into. And that's why when you see guys just blow up, and they have a habit of doing it, that's what's happening, is that they're scared to try a new way of thinking, and so they stay stuck in their current thinking, and it keeps this repetition just keeps up going on and on and on. And I look at it and going, the one thing that you can't do in this business is you can't take things personally, is that you're just looking at a brain that is not organized for success in trading. It's not like the brain that you brought in another endeavor. It could be highly successful in that endeavor. It's just that it's not successful in trading.
And so it sounds like it's the ability to turn on or to have impartiality and this aspect of discipline can only come online if you're able to kind of turn off some of the chatter that's going on in your mind, or kind of recognize the monkey brain that's kind of always in the background, but yet somehow still it so you can begin to turn on these other more powerful, I think you call them archetypes.
Yeah. Archetypes are, the way I explain archetypes is that archetypes are symbolic representations of the emotional programs, and, suddenly discipline becomes ruler, okay? Like Winston Churchill was a great ruler. Without him, we in the United States would probably be speaking German, okay? Yeah. And warrior comes forward as a symbolic representation out of the emotional program courage, and self-soothing comes out of a symbolic representation called caregiver. Impartiality actually becomes a symbolic representation of sage. These are the archetypal things that Carl Jung talked about, and I just find that ultimately what you're doing is that it's the emotional programs. You have to feel the emotion. When you're feeling an emotion, what you're actually doing is you're experiencing the chemistry of the emotion in your body, in your brain, and is altering thought. That's the feeling of an emotion. It's very important. It's not touchy-feely. It is altering the way you think. So the deal is what you're attempting to do is you are learning how to build an emotional cocktail based on discipline, impartiality, self-soothing, and courage, okay? And for advanced people, intuition, okay? But that's a whole nother thing, is that you can build a mind that faces uncertainty that does that, okay? Or you can stay in the old pattern, historical pattern that you brought to trading, and, out of fear you try to control, out of fear you try not to make mistakes. But at the same time, you don't approach ambiguity that you cannot tame from fear or from anger. You just don't do it. It doesn't, or euphoria, thinking that things are going to be fine. Don't do it.
And so you listed as fear, you call it fear, greed, and euphoria. Those are kind of the three deadly sins, you would call them, or what? Deadly emotions that trip us up?
Well, I would actually say fear, as in fear and anxiety, and greed for sure, but actually most greed that I see would be better called lust, okay? Where you basically, you lust. When you see somebody chasing a trade, jumping into trade, that's not greed, that's lust.
It looks too good. Pass over, right?
Yeah, too good. And then the other one, euphoria. Euphoria is a problem. You know, most people would love to have a problem with euphoria. And a couple of years ago, I'm speaking to a crowd in China, and I'm talking about the mind that when you're trading, you do not want to experience fear. You do not want to experience feeling good. And a guy in the audience says, "Are you telling me that we can't feel good when we're trading?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, tell me something. What happens when you feel good? When trading, you exit with a profit. What mind do you bring back to the search for the next entry?"
Right.
I feel good. What you've done is you've moved from humble confidence to overconfidence. Euphoria is an emotional state that makes you feel that, hey, man, the good times are going to roll on forever.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to the whale at J.P. Morgan that evaporated $1 billion.
Yeah.
Okay? He got euphoric, and out of euphoria, you have testosterone, so you can't make proper risk, and you have dopamine making you feel good. That's not the cocktail that you want creating mind that trades. Now, it might be great to do it like, there are different places where feeling good is a great deal, but not when trading. Same thing with fear, is that you don't want cortisol, ramping through your brain, creating the kind of thinking, because the moment that you're in anxiety, what you're doing is you are thinking into the future and seeing the bad things that are going to happen. Right. And what you'll do is you'll hesitate. Now, or when you get into a trade and the thing actually gets profitable, you'll take your profits early, because scarcity thinking is saying, you should take your profits now before they're taken away from you. That's anxiety talking. That's cortisol talking. So the key is you're wanting to think from discipline and partiality, but you have to be able to manage the fear, not by ignoring it, but by turning toward it and re-mentoring. The fear can be your teacher, because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're moving away from fear as an emotional state that builds mind and moving toward concern. You better be concerned. I mean, you've got capital on the line, you're risking capital, so you need to have a level of concern that allows you to maintain order of the mind. Fear, though, is when what you're seeing is a biological threat when the biological threat's not really there.
Not really there.
Your emotional brain can't tell the difference.
And so then can you step us through, how do you architect that trading mindset? What are the you can give us some high-level steps? What are the steps to go about, kind of fostering or building this ideal trading mindset, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is you have to learn how to manage the emotion, the biology of the emotion. And in my work, I call it emotional regulation work. Herbert Benson called it relaxation response. It's been known as belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. What you're doing is you're recognizing that every emotion has a biological signature. And fear and anger, you do a lot of either high rapid breathing, or you're holding your breath and you're producing tension in your body. What you're really seeing is the autonomic nervous system triggering to fight, flight, and it's preparing to flee or to fight. Mm-hmm. And it's jettisoning the ability to think. Okay, you have to catch that, and by diaphragmatic breathing, using the bellows to be able to breathe into the abdominal area, that kind of breathing and anger and fear cannot coexist. You will interrupt the process of the emotion if you do that. If you practice relaxation, muscle relaxation, you're doing the same thing. What you're doing is you're disrupting the ability of the emotion to grow from the triggering of it to the arousal of it to the flooding of hormones into your system. That's the first thing that you got to do. And as nice as that sounds, is that's not going to solve the problem.
Right, and I'm a big fan of heart rate variability, and I know you've spoken about that in the past. I know I'm a big user of the M-Wave. Do you recommend that to your clients, and what's your thoughts around using heart rate variability to kind of, like you said, become more mindful of your existing state or kind of short circuit that?
I used to train people with the M-Wave, and
cool.
I quit. There are a couple problems I had. One is that it's basically what you're doing. I noticed on your website I was saying where you actually train yourself with that and get the mind ready. The thing about the M-Wave is that, first of all, it's not giving you readings in real time.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of lagging, isn't it?
Yes, it is lagging.
Yep.
The second thing is that their coherence, what happened in Houston, the autonomic nervous system is composed of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. One is fight, flight, the other is rest, digest. Okay? When your coherence is in the way the M-Wave does it is when you're seeing coherence, you're way over there in rest, digest. And often you're too darn relaxed, okay, to trade effectively. What you're looking for, and there's a sweet spot, like for instance, my pulse rate at rest is about 60 beats per minute, okay? The intrinsic heart rate, where you move over into fight-flight, is around 90 beats per minute, okay? So what you're doing is you're saying, I need to be somewhere, my heart rate, and it would show with your heart rate variability also, it needs to be between somewhere between 60 and 90. However, what I've discovered when I was actually training with this is that if I get past, say, 68 beats per minute, I'm already nudging over to fight-flight. And what's happened is you want alert mind, you want focused mind, you want ready mind, but you don't want to trigger the physicality of fight-flight.
Right.
And that's one of the things that M-Wave just can't do well. However, there is a product coming out, hopefully in October. It's called Embrace, and I hope not everybody just goes and buys this thing because it is a device. It's coming out as a watch, but it basically was developed to be able to monitor stress levels, and it's doing it in real time, and it's doing its stress levels for epilepsy procedures.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and what it does is it will actually catch in real time the triggering of the autonomic nervous system, translated the triggering of an emotion.
Yeah.
And what it will do, and this is particularly with kids, and the kids would be having it as an ankle brace, something on their ankle while they're sleeping. And once the trip happened, once the arousal had started, the device would call the mom on her phone at night. It would wake her up, and basically you had an alert. And this is long before the seizure happened. The mom goes in and can calm the nervous system down, and you don't have a seizure.
That's fascinating. And what's the name of that
device?
Very
fascinating. That's called Embrace.
Embrace. Okay. Interesting.
And it uses skin conductance. It uses skin conductance rather than heart rate variability.
That's interesting.
And the woman behind it and the group behind it, they're MIT engineers. They're just freaking. They have found a sensor that does really powerful stuff. And I'm going to be adapting it so that I can teach it. Because I ultimately teach an entire system around when you see a signal happen, like when a telephone call is a signal to me, or where you see a signal in your trade, or when you hit a particular indicator light. I am actually training people to regulate the mind right there at that moment so that, your methodology and your head game basically merge at that time.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. I literally can't wait. And it was getting so darn expensive developing my own, and then you read about somebody she's already solved the problem. Okay, and suddenly it's just it makes more sense to wait a few months than to keep spending money on development. So that's
it's
what
amazing. The technology. The technology is going to be just an incredible kind of overlay into what's going on with our trading selves as we execute our trading plans.
Absolutely.
So what do you think? So I see a lot of bad advice from cyberspace about traders saying you need to do some jumping jacks. You got to raise up your heart rate before you start trading. You got to do some pull-ups, some squats or whatever, so that you kind of elevate your readiness. Sounds like you're saying it's probably not a good idea to get too worked up because you're going to trigger that kind of maybe a cortisol response as you're getting a little over amped up. Is that right?
Well, it depends on how you do this. Let me explain it to you this way, okay? Is that I work with a fund manager in Singapore, okay? And if you know anything about portfolio managers and fund managers, is that they wake up anxiety-ridden, and by the time they get to work, they're messes, okay?
Yeah.
At any rate, what happened is this guy, he said, it's really weird because what happens is I'm just in a fog all morning long. Then at lunch I go for a run and I come back and I can think clearly. Okay? What he's done is he's burned off the cortisol. Okay? And what he's had is a relaxation response back to homeostasis where he can think clearly.
Yeah.
And what we did with him is that we had a morning run. We were not doing it to pump himself up, but what we wanted to do, we wanted to get at the relaxation response of where, basically when you have that sympathetic system go off, you know that it's going to go back to the parasympathetic and you're going to calm down to a peak performance level.
Right.
And he was able to monitor it that way. Now, people getting cranked up before they go trading is crazy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, during a day, Houston, ultimately, an emotion is any disruption to a standard sensorial pattern the brain has already created, any deviation to homeostasis. An emotion automatically arises. And then it goes through arousal, the revving up, and it goes to the feeling state where the chemistry, it's no longer building up, it is flooding the system. And then comes the action, the motivation, and whatever meaning is behind there. But the interesting thing is if you catch yourself where you don't catch yourself and can interrupt the arousal of an emotion and you see that you're in fear or if you're in euphoria, the worst thing you can do is continue trading.
Yeah.
Your brain's already cooked. It's not fit to trade at that moment.
Yep.
At that particular time, exercise is a really very good option because what it does is it accelerates the burn on the chemistry of the emotion to burn it out of your system so you can come back to a homeostasis moment where your mind's online to be able to trade effectively. But, all this stuff.
Yeah.
That
makes a lot of sense.
If once you understand the emotion is chemistry, that's what an emotion is. It's chemistry. And you're just simply managing the chemistry. And when it gets over, when it just gets too cranked up, you've got to calm it down somewhere. You've got to put some water on the fire. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense because the context really matters, like you said there, right? So I like how you're being really prescriptive with exercise and how you're going to inject it into a daily routine. That makes a lot of sense. So going back to the trading mindset, so the first step is to, you said, like calm your emotional, your physical state.
Yeah. And what that does, that allows you to get to the door of the mind. Okay. It doesn't open the door. It doesn't help you in the mind. But if you don't learn to regulate the emotion, you're never going to get to the mind anyway.
Right.
Okay. It's just that simple. And then you're going to have to develop a mindfulness practice. Okay. You're going to have to awaken the observing self, and however you do it. I have a specific way that I do it that has proven very useful, and ultimately you begin to see the mind as you open the door into the mind, and suddenly the observer with some distinctions, you start looking. You have an idea of what you're looking for, which is one of the problems with most people. They don't know what they're looking for. And the first thing that I do is I have people look for what I call the adapted voice or the orphan as an archetype and the inner critic. And if you go and understand, if you take a look at Chinese yin yang, what you discover is that there is a destructive element of the self. There is a constructive element of the self. ignoring that destructive element is dangerous, and most people do. They don't want to turn toward, and this is where you start discovering that the woes of trading can be boiled down to 4 self-limiting beliefs. 1 is of your inadequacy. 2 is your lack of mattering. 3 is your lack of worth. So you confuse like hard work with basically success,
yep.
and that's my worth, or powerlessness. And all human beings have these problems. It doesn't matter where you're from. This is just endemic to the Hindus would call it the wound of your existence. The Christians or the Jews would call it you were born into a broken world. If you're existential, you would call that existential angst. It doesn't really matter how you frame it, but what you're doing is you're looking at it and you're going, I need to turn toward this and regulate it. I know this is my internal struggle, and I also know that when I'm listening to the criticism and judgment within myself, and if you don't think you have it and you're pretending that you're a positive thinker, last time you beat yourself up after a mistake, that's your performance beliefs, and there's your inner critic, and there's this fearful orphan, okay? And what you're doing is you're recognizing that you have been really asleep at the wheel. But in awakening to mindfulness, you start going, okay, what I need to do is this is the history that I got born into. This is the suit that I just showed up in, and this is all I know. This is all my brain knew putting me together the first time. It's nobody's fault. It's my responsibility, though, of saying, I know that I have these other programs within me, and I need to start developing them so that not only do I have the fear, not only do I have the judgment living within me, I also find this discipline, I find this courage, I find this self-soothing, and I find this impartiality. And I teach, the way I teach this, and I really consider it far superior to anything that I've seen, is that I use what is known in neurobiology as memory restructuring.
Okay.
Where in what you discover in memory is there is no such thing as video memory. What
Right.
there
never
is
a static snapshot.
it never existed. And what you call memory is actually your brain taking the experience and encoding it based on the observer you are and based on the emotional state you are into a memory that's stored in various places in your brain. And then when you recall a memory, what you're doing is based on the observer, based on emotional state, the memory comes together differently. That's why memories morph over time. This is why they become corrupted, and God knows what really happened, okay?
Yeah.
But what I do is I teach people how to go into moments of where they have been really challenged, where the outcome was uncertain, but they were able to push through it. And what I do is I teach them how to get at the emotional program that was in that moment that allowed them to do that. Most people don't, that's not the way they remember a situation. And I'm not interested in the way the brain initially encoded that experience.
Right.
I'm interested in how we can re-encode, literally with awareness, re-encode the memory so that we have access to these elements that were there as part of the performance.
So you're kind of changing the charge of that memory. Maybe it was a negative charge before. You're changing that perception of that memory now to something that's more empowering. Is that right?
Well, you're not doing it. There's no hocus pocus here. The thing is that it really did happen.
Right.
Okay? It did happen, and that's the difference between visualization and affirmations. Is that in affirmations and visualizations, you're wishing for something.
Mm-hmm.
But in what you discover, though, is in the midst of the fight, in the midst of struggle, in the midst of all that uncertainty, visualization and affirmations break down. However, if you're using memory enrichment where you're going in and you're going, no, this did in fact happen. I remember it happening. I know for a fact that this trait is a solid trait. It's within me, and I can learn how to call it forward. Okay?
Yeah.
And you're doing it by the feeling and stuff like that of it. And then visualization and affirmation become very useful. Okay? But the key is what you're doing is you're going in memory and you're altering the way the brain encoded it. You're not fabricating the memory, like lying to yourself. What you're doing is saying, I'm very clear these elements had to be in place or I would never have been able to perform that way. As a matter of fact, I can go into the memory, slow it down, and I can feel these different components. And that's the one thing that I do that it's very powerful, and I actually learned it because I was failing a trader a number of years ago, and he was working hard. He was doing everything I was asking. He was a good student. The problem was with the teacher. And I was using the symbolic representation model that I'd always used, and I finally came to a moment where I realized that this guy was incapable of symbolic representation. He didn't have a visual component or an auditory component to thought. What he had was a feeling component, a kinetic component. And what I did is I realized that I used to debrief victims of violent crime for court. And I got hired to do that because I could get cleaner memories that stood up to the rigors of court a lot more than detectives and other therapists. And what I was really doing is I was not creating false memories. That's what I was really doing. And what happened is I realized that I could reverse that process. And instead of getting clean memories, what I could do is I could get memories that were focused on certain aspects of that experience. And I could bring them forward, and we could start building a mind out of that chemistry rather than the chemistry that the brain encoded.
Basically,
there's a lot of good examples of it.
So you basically have these restructured memories that are now positive, and you can kind of pull up on call. Is that the idea?
Yeah,
and then that's kind of the foundational layer for maybe the archetypes that you can then begin to insert into your committee. Is that the...
Yeah, well, ultimately what happens in my work is that the most important thing is getting at the feeling component of the emotional program. And I use that through memory restructuring, okay? If you have that, you've got the chemistry, okay? You've got the chemistry that creates the mind. And what's crazy is that then if you can add symbolic representation to it, say Winston Churchill becoming representative of discipline. And by the way, I define discipline as maintaining order under pressure. Okay? There is a role. And suddenly you have what really separates us from the rest of our animal kin is you have the ability to use symbolic representation as an image to trigger that resonates with this emotional program. Okay? But you have to have the feeling state of the emotional program that's there, and you have to have both associated with one another. You're just not going to have archetypal action figures running around in your head, and all you have to do is think of the action figure, and there you are. That's not the way it works.
Right.
Okay, but you have to come down, and that's why I ground stuff in the body, and literally in the biology of memory. We know that the body performed in this uncertainty in such a way that was uncommon, but we're not caring if it's not habituated. We're going to re-habituate the way the mind responds, the brain responds to uncertainty. Once we have that, we can do that. It's really cool to watch, and suddenly you realize, oh, when I do this, what I gain control of is the process. I gain control of the mind that I'm bringing into the moment of management of uncertainty. And that's what you can control, and that's where basically winning or losing at that particular moment is immaterial. The real key is if you have an edge, if you have the ability in theory of saying that, probability is on my side.
Yep.
That's the theoretical end of it, and that's your method. Then what you're doing is you're coming over here and saying, now I'm going to build a mind that is able to harness that edge. The mind itself becomes the Holy Grail. It becomes the edge because suddenly you're no longer chasing what is impossible to conquer outcome. What you can conquer, literally, is the self that you bring into the moment. I'll give you an example, Houston. It's a really good example of this. Is that several years ago, I'm watching field and track Olympics and there's this American sprinter who's, he's got all the hype, he's got all this kind of stuff, and they're talking, he's a hurdler. These are hurdling.
Okay.
I like hurdling because I attempted to hurdle in high school, and you discover it's an enormously difficult feat to teach the body how to do this, and Rande did not teach himself well at all. Let's just say that. But I have an appreciation of athletes who can train body and mind to do that. At any rate, they were talking about this American guy. He's going to do everything. All these announcers and all these guys, they're just talking about what a great guy he is. Now he's going to win. They've already written the script. Anyway, they get into what happens is that, they get ready, the gun fires off, and he does blow away the field, and he does set world record, and he does win gold.
Huh.
And, after a hurdle like that, after a race like that, he's on the other end, and he's huffing and puffing. He's getting his win back, and he finally gets it. And then all these journalists and announcers get around him, and they stick all these microphones in his face. And they were saying, what was it like? What was it like? What was it like? And, this athlete's looking at him going like, what? And what were you thinking? And he's looking at him really confused. What were you thinking? Did you know you were going to win? Did you know you were going to win the gold? Did you know this? And he finally looks at him and says, you want to know what I was thinking? And they said, the world wants to know. The world wants to know. And so he looks at him and says, well, I'll tell you what I was thinking. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This man, no doubt, has a team of coaches around him that 1, 2, 3, 4 has synchronized a way of the body moving through time, okay? That's probably been 10 years in the making.
Right.
There's no doubt that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 is something that a sports psychologist used to train him to produce a performance mind for this moment.
Right.
He was not thinking in the future. He was not thinking in the past. He was present, 1, 2, 3, 4. He was executing. He was controlling the one thing that he could control, his execution. He was controlling process. The journalists were very disappointed. This interview, okay? He just no, that's what I was doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, later he's on the podium, he's getting the gold, he's taking his lap around the thing, he's got the American flag flying, and he's jubilant. He's jubilant. And they're finally interviewing him, and he's talking about the outcome goals that his team had built 8 years ago that finally came into fulfillment tonight.
Mm.
It's not as if he didn't have outcome goals, but he was not acting during the performance on outcome goals.
Yeah.
He was acting on performance goals, controlling process. By doing that, he was able to achieve the outcome goals, yes. In the same way, the same thing with the trader is that if you have a methodology in theory that really does have an edge, a probability for you, and you develop the mind that also has an edge by being able to stay in the moment, you don't have to worry about winning or losing. That's not there. You know the money's going to take care of itself. And ultimately, if you were to take a loss, you really begin to ask some very simple questions. Is this a method mistake? No, I would have done the same thing. Is this a psychological mistake? No, I was steady as it goes. Oh, this is just landing on the wrong side of probability.
Randomness, yeah.
Yeah. Then if you win, you're not taking credit for it. What you're saying is that, okay, I landed because of my edge. I had a better chance than even of being on the side of winning than on the side of losing.
Yeah.
I don't take credit for it. I don't have to get euphoric about it. I just next. And after all the day's over with, you can go have fun. You can do anything you want. But while you're there in the moment, it's all process.
Yeah. And I think intellectually, I think we all get that, but I think it's so hard when you're in that moment. And you were describing before, when you can intellectualize having these different people in your committee who are kind of functioning at different levels, but until you can kind of get it into your core memories, like you said, kind of make it more kinetic and connected.
Yes.
It's just a thought exercise, right? So I'd love to hear more, maybe at another point in time, more about your programs because, man, they sound so interesting in terms of how they can turn around a trader.
I'll tell you, it's really interesting. What most people discover is that they discover that this really isn't about trading.
Right.
It's really about their life. It's about how you engage and work with life. And it just so happens that what trading gives us is a near black and white truth meter about the effectiveness of the virtual simulation you've created and project onto reality.
Onto the world, yeah,
and
exactly.
It does. And it creates trading is the most powerful route of self-discovery and of self-mastery that I have ever come across in my life. And it's something where I love teaching it because I don't have to hear anything about Tony Robbins. I don't have to hear anything about all these guys and all this stuff. It all comes down to trading account.
Yeah.
If you buy the assumption that your trading account is reflecting the effectiveness of the beliefs that you're projecting onto the market, okay, then what happens is there's no BS. Okay, we have a black and white barometer that is allowing us to get into the belief system of performance.
Yeah, and just
my
give me
promise to
goosebumps
you,
there.
Houston.
Yeah. Give me goosebumps because that was a great visualization there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I promise you, this is all about your beliefs about your ability to manage and prosper in uncertainty. That's what this is all about.
It's kind of like the other analogy I was just thinking of while you were saying that, how trading is also, you could relate it to being simply like a blank canvas of art or a blank art canvas. And whatever comes out of you and your art, if it looks terrible, then it's just a reflection of where you are as an artist.
Right.
If you don't like it, you can't curse the art.
Right.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is revealing, if you look at it, if you have it, you neither like nor dislike, and if you look at it and go, what is this revealing to me?
Yeah.
It becomes a much more interesting, you become designer of the possibility of who you are rather than being stuck in a history that's basically talking you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, from my perspective, is that you do not have thoughts, you do not have beliefs. In fact, they're having you.
They're having you, yeah. I love that.
Yeah, and until you finally grasp that, then good luck with your trading because, the mind is a very powerful instrument. And I think Einstein said it well. He said the intuitive mind is the gift. The rational mind is the help, okay? It's the servant. What we have done in the modern world, we have trashed the gift and we have taken the servant and made him king.
Yes.
And that may work in a lot of circumstances and a lot of endeavors. It's not going to work on the quantum level in trading. That's fundamentally what it amounts to, is that the emotional brain and the left brain have to work together. They have to harness together because all the left brain is going to do is to produce an explanation that explains what the right brain has already decided.
Right.
I mean, if you're hesitating, you have good reasons to hesitate. You have good reasons to want more confirmation. At the same time, it's just an explanation. You just rationalize your emotion. Yeah.
Exactly.
There's your left brain.
Yeah. So fascinating. So, Randy, I want to be mindful of your time because we're a little bit over already. Maybe I can just fast fire a few last questions to you if you don't mind.
Okay.
So going back to what we just said, so what advice would you give to a brand new trader if they're just starting out now? Where do they need to invest themselves? What's the kind of prioritized things they need to be thinking about?
Initially, find a good teacher of method. You need to be able to see that you have an edge in simulation. Okay? What happens is that just because you have an edge in simulation, obviously doesn't mean you have an edge in real time thing. But the thing is then it becomes an issue of trust. Do you trust your edge?
Right.
Okay? And the moment you start going live, what I encourage new traders to do is start small. All you want to do is you want to feel the edge. You want to feel, you want to feel the risk. You want to feel the heart accelerating. You want to feel that stuff. And if you're wise, you don't buy the bullshit that, oh, what happens is you'll acclimate to this, you'll do this, but no, what you're going to do is you're going to traumatize yourself.
Yeah.
And you're going to set up some really very bad patterns that's going to take an enormous amount of effort to get out of later, okay? It's at that moment that you start self-development. And, obviously I'm high on myself, but what you're looking for is you're looking for emotional intelligence development. And that's the major thing, is you realize that the mind that you brought to trading is simply not going to be the mind that's going to produce success in trading. You're going to have an entire paradigm shift from the certainty model to the probability model. And that's a paradigm shift, Houston. That's you're not going to do that by wishful thinking. You're going to do that under the guidance of a mentor. That's what and in the same way that, I know that you're self-taught, and I can understand that, and there's a lot of guys who shouldn't be teaching. But I've seen people that have 2 years in who are well trained, and they know methodology, they know how to have that, and then they come and say, well, I need to train my mind. And you can see these guys in 3 or 4 years, and they're quite competent traders.
Yeah.
Then you see people who, basically they become dependent upon, first of all, does the methodology actually work? That's the thing. But ultimately what I'm saying is,
that's number one. Yeah.
Develop the knowledge, okay? And then what happens is, don't assume that because you have knowledge, you know how to apply it under the rigors of trading. That's when you start looking for training. And, ultimately they are foundational skills that whoever you train with has. If you're not teaching emotional regulation, if you're not teaching a structure of the mind, if you're not teaching about how to truly organize a new mind, and I'm probably kind of like you. There are very few performance coaches, psychological performance coaches, that I have any respect for. Mm-hmm. And you look at them, NLP is just not going to work, friends. Hypnosis is not going to work long term. You really ultimately have to get down at the level of belief and the circuitry that holds that belief, and you're going to have to be able to turn toward that discomfort of that belief, and you're going to have the skill sets that allow you to transform and rewire that belief into higher function.
Yeah.
And it's both on a biological level and it's on a psychological level that you got to do that. But anyway, that's the first thing is learn a system that in fact can extract capital out of the system. And then when you start going live, what you do is you start recognizing, you start feeling the triggering. That's when you need the training, and you really don't want to set up traumatic patterns. I mean, it's typical for me to work with a guy who's blown up a couple $100,000 or more, and I can promise you they're traumatized. Whether or not they want to be traumatized or not doesn't matter.
It's already
Their
happened.
brain, it's already happened. They're traumatized, and you get them to try to risk, and things go haywire. And that's the thing. If you follow that formula, and there's some guys like, after 10 years, people who are really evolving with themselves as traders, they will come to profitability, but they could have cut that distance, that struggle, a lot if there had been a better path. And I recognize in trading that it's hard to figure out who to trust, and it's also hard to get out of your way, which is on a psychological level. That's what I basically see is people just refuse to get out of their way.
And boy, does that ever resonate with me. You just basically described my journey. So that's so true. And it sounds like it's a lot of, educators, quote unquote, are just giving lip service to the, the emotional side of trading. So most educators have a small component of psychological management, but at the end of the day, it's just really usually a just more like lip service than actual the kind of deep inner work that needs to be done to really like you said, confront some of these limiting beliefs.
Yeah,
so
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. So maybe one last question for you.
Okay.
I guess I'll flip the switch on that. So what do you see with successful traders? What are the traits that they now carry or have built to themselves that allow them to be successful in trading?
They're enormously patient. They're humble, and they tend to reframe money and begin to see that they are stewards of capital, and they start becoming more generous.
Yep.
That's what I see with the Wall Street wolf is. There's going to always be sociopaths, and
right.
there are going to be some good traders. But for most people that have what I would call a typical emotional repertoire, is that ultimately trading, as you really gain self-mastery, you really become more humble. You realize just how easy it is that you can lose your mind and blow up capital, and you know that it happens so darn easy.
Yeah.
And you really do become patient. You realize that the work of trading is patience. It is not action. What happens is you sit in readiness, you sit in preparedness, and literally the work is not. It's kind of like most people think, well, I need to be doing something to be doing something. No, you don't. You need to allow the market to come to you.
Yeah.
You don't go chase market. And you see that repeatedly, is that they're much more humble. They're very patient. And most of them, as Ringo Starr said in one of his songs, if you plan to sing the blues, you better pay your dues. Okay?
Great quote.
Great quote. But it's true. You've paid your dues, and what happens is that you can really have compassion for young traders and for traders who refuse to get out of their way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, to me, one of the big deals as you do become successful and you're able to reliably extract capital out of the markets, I believe that it opens up a whole other question about what is money and why am I sitting here making money?
Yeah, what's the meaning behind all this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite trader trainers actually, he actually devotes 10% of his net profit to an orphanage in Romania.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Okay? And but that's what you begin to see with these guys. And when you get good at this stuff, and it may sound really weird when you're struggling, is that these guys can extract capital pretty much at will.
Yeah.
And it really becomes, what is this money about? Is that I need to begin to develop a much bigger world that I live in than the small world that maybe money used to be for me.
Yeah.
I really do become a steward, and I have to start asking, how do I use this wonderful new gift that I have?
That's funny you say that, because I started that same practice at the beginning of the year. Every Monday, I'll take a portion of my proceeds from my trading, and I'll put it towards Kiva, which is a micro funding donation service.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that since the beginning of the year. And yes, it's just I agree with your ideas around the evolution of a trader. So once you get to a certain point, you stop thinking so much about yourself, and then you start to looking outward and looking for more meaning. So I really appreciate that. So maybe just a couple of more questions. The last one is the last two are, number one, aside from your book, and I want to plug your book for a second, because the mindful trading, is it right? Mindful Trading is a very powerful book, and I've read that a couple of times over. Other than your book, are there any other books that you recommend on trading or otherwise?
Yeah, I do like Mark Douglas's work. he the way I've had numbers of people explain it to me is that they'll say, Rande, Mark Douglas is able to tell you exactly what the mind of a trader needs to look like. The problem is he doesn't know how to teach you to develop that mind. Okay? Which is a small problem, okay?
Yeah.
And I have a number of people who will read his book and my book side by side. Okay? And because, you know, people, I am much more in how-to. I'm interested in how you develop this mind.
Yeah.
And I am saying, diagnosing it and saying, here's what the mind's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Steenbarger, I like. He tends to come from a cognitive position, which I find more limiting. But he's a good clinician. I like him. And there's if you're really into some reading, there's a British neuroscientist by the name of John Coates. And his latest book is, let's see if I can get this quote right, the title right, is Between Wolf and Dog. And what he's doing is he was a very
trader,
successful,
right? And then he became a
he was a derivative trader. He was a good one. He was not a fly by night who just got blown out. But neuroscience is that's what captures his imagination.
Yeah.
But what he did, he goes in and he really studies the high-end trader and what's really going on on a physiological level, on a mental level with them. You know, he doesn't give very much hope in the end about how to manage this, but if you want to have an understanding of the physiology of emotion in action, John Coates' book is, I consider it essential reading myself.
Okay.
But,
great recommendation.
But I read stuff like that, so there you go.
Thank you for those. And where can people find more about you? Where's the best place to go?
Website, and it's www.tradersstateofmind.com, and it is a content-rich website. There will be, I probably have currently 30 or 40 articles. I probably have 30 or 40 videos that are both me being interviewed and me, usually walking around my property. I have a really nice piece of property that I really, really like, and I tend to videotape myself somewhere, depending on what's blooming around my property or someplace that we're on vacation, where I'm explaining different aspects. But I also have a free ebook that is a compilation of 164 pages of past articles that I've written over. I've written a lot, basically, and
I highly recommend that ebook. It's you go into you share so much stuff in there that I think everyone should download that.
Yeah, that's the place to start. And the other thing, what a lot of people do is I have a monthly webinar, and a lot of people, and what's interesting is I'll have 100 people in a webinar, and I recognize a number of the people, and they've been coming there. It's kind of, I used to think, well, these are just webinar junkies. And what happens is that what I've discovered is when I started asking people, particularly when I know that these are past clients, current clients, why are you doing this when you can pick up the phone and talk to me anytime you want? He says, Rande, what happens is you just need to keep your nose turned toward this stuff. And the webinars, that would be the next step, is go to the webinars where I'm explaining this, and you're actually, you're literally beginning to, instead of a written page trying to come alive, what happens is you start experiencing this space where I'm in it, and it's kind of like listening to this interview. Suddenly Houston and Rande are in this interview, and you hear there is just something different than reading a printed word. But those are the things that I would do, and that's where. And right now it has just like really truly occurred to me is that until you are willing to belly up and recognize that you have a brain designed to control certainty. You're going to have to develop a brain that engages probability. Until you come to that moment, you are going to suffer. And you are going to make professional traders a lot of money. Okay? Because you really are going to have to change the way you perceive markets, and you're going to have to really truly look inside yourself.
Yeah.
And the content-rich website gives a lot of people all the knowledge, intellectual knowledge they want, and at some moment you have to recognize that intellectual knowledge does not mean performance knowledge.
Yep.
You know, eventually you have to engage and start really practicing the stuff.
Agreed. And if you're a trader and, you know, you feel like you're on the cusp, but it feels like you're always on the cusp, it's probably because you probably haven't done enough of that work that Randy's been talking about.
That's it.
So that's exactly, yeah, I couldn't agree further. So Randy, just again, thank you so much for your time today. I want to be respectful of your time. So again, thank you for taking the time out and having this great conversation.
You bet. I've had a really good time, Houston. It's been a lot of fun.